When a guy gets his orbital shattered in front of 72 or 73,000 screaming fans, boxing is on an uptick. Julio Cesar Chavez, by this point, had already obviously smashed Juan Laporte. He had beaten Hector Camacho, and he had already ruined Meldrick Taylor's whole career.
I hear him. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier.
Hey, what's up with it, family? It's Hot Boxing Minute. What better time than now than to start my first boxing episode on YouTube? Why not? I've done sparring videos and training videos in the past. Now I'm going to talk about boxing content. When a guy gets his orbital shattered in front of 72 or 73,000 screaming fans, boxing is on an uptick. If you didn't know, the Showtime summer boxing schedule got dropped about a month ago. It's jam-packed with fights. It's under the PBC banner. We're not going to talk about whether or not you like Al Haymon or not. That's a whole different discussion. But we've got the Charlos on that schedule, Tank Davis, David Benavidez, all kind of stars. Tonight, I just got done watching the WBC Super Bantamweight title fight between Luis Neri, El Pantera, and Brandon Figueroa from Velasco, Texas. Both these guys are undefeated coming into the fight, or they were undefeated going into the fight. My prediction going into the fight was that Brandon Figueroa was going to win by 12-round unanimous decision. I think he was the underdog going into the fight. It was the classic case of a power puncher in Luis Neri against Brandon Figueroa, the volume puncher. Now, we saw Luis Neri's past performance, and it was a win, but it wasn't necessarily a trademark dominant Luis Neri performance, and that could probably be attributed to the fact that he was under the Eddie Reynoso coaching system. It was his first fight under Eddie Reynoso, and we know that based on what we saw with, Oscar Valdez and obviously Andy Ruiz Jr.'s last performance, sometimes when fighters are accumulating to a new training style, it takes a bit of adjusting. Or even Ryan Garcia. He took a bit of time adjusting to the Reynoso fighting system. Luis Neri didn't want to have any of that. He fought Alameda, and he won that fight, but it wasn't in the normal dominant fashion we're used to seeing Luis Neri. So anyways, Luis Neri went back with his old training team for this fight that he had with Brandon Figueroa that I just left. Now, Brandon Figueroa, he had that barn burner with Damian Vasquez. That's the boxing legend Israel Vasquez's little cousin, or little nephew, my apologies. But he must have thrown like 800 punches. He's clearly a volume puncher. He's 5'9", so he's kind of big for a super bantamweight frame. A 72-inch reach, nuts. Anyways, it was a power puncher against a volume puncher, and it went into the 7th round before Brandon Figueroa finally dropped Luis Neri with a body shot. I didn't expect that to happen. It happened. Either way, the champion, or the former champion, Luis Neri, had his back against the ropes for pretty much the entire fight. It looked like he didn't really have a solution or an answer to Brandon Figueroa's reach, his shot output as far as the volume of punches he was throwing, and I even got to see Brandon Figueroa switch stances. He was going from southpaw to orthodox, and he was fluidly going back and forth. Great fight. Congratulations to Brandon Figueroa. Stephen Fulton Jr., the WBO Super Bantamweight champion, was in attendance. Of course, he's got some vested interest in it. I think the next fight is going to be Stephen Fulton Jr. and Brandon Figueroa for the unification fight. Obviously, there's also Akhmadaliev floating around there in Super Bantamweight with the other two belts, so we might potentially, cross our fingers, y'all. I want to see, obviously, an undisputed fight by the middle of next year in that Super Bantamweight division. If you haven't been paying attention to boxing, folks, these smaller weight classes have been scrapping, and I mean super scrapping. You've got the action going on at Super Bantamweight. You got the action going on at featherweight with Oscar Valdez and Shakur Stevenson and all them. Bantamweight with the names I just mentioned, Super Bantamweight. At Bantamweight, you've got Nayo Inoue. You've even got Donny Nietes, the Filipino legend who's making a return. He wants to make a comeback, and he looked impressive in his win a few weeks back. You've got the flyweights or the super flyweights. You've got Jerwin Ancajas. You've got El Gallo Estrada. You've got Chocolatito. There's just so much action-packed fights going on at the smaller divisions. Don't overlook them, especially if you like to watch scraps. So, we're going to move on from that Brandon Figueroa topic, and I want to talk about what I witnessed last weekend with Canelo Alvarez. Can we talk about that? I don't care if you're tired of hearing about the subject. First off, let me preface this by saying, in 1993, there was a tough junior welterweight fighter by the name of Greg Haugen. Now, Greg Haugen was the man. He wasn't outstanding. He was going after Julio Cesar Chavez's title. Now, Julio Cesar Chavez, as you well know, there's levels to this as far as being a great fighter. Julio Cesar Chavez was up there. Greg Haugen, he had some good fights up until that point. He was the IBF champion, if I'm not mistaken. He had already beaten Hector Camacho. He had lost to Vinny Pazienza. I think he got in a draw, or he lost to Sweet Pea. But he had some good fights on his record. And then, of course, there was Julio Cesar Chavez. El León de Culiacán, El Gran Campeón, was 86-0, or it might have been like 84-0. I'm not really sure. I don't know the exact number, but anyways, Julio Cesar Chavez by this point had already obviously smashed Juan Laporte. He had beaten Hector Camacho, and he had already ruined Meldrick Taylor's whole career. And then you have this young upstart named Greg Haugen. This is all tying into the Canelo Alvarez thing, you guys, so follow me on this one. So Greg Haugen is disrespecting Julio Cesar Chavez. He tells him that he beat Tijuana cab drivers that my mom could whip, as far as talking about Julio Cesar Chavez's huge record, because we know that the first half of Julio Cesar Chavez's career was mostly fought in Mexico. And I'll tell you what, folks, if it was easy enough to just starch a bunch of Mexican fighters, a lot of fighters here on this side of the border would have been doing it. It's a lot easier said than done than to beat 40, 50 Mexicans in a row. We all know this now. In the 90s, they didn't know that. So he's disrespecting Mexico. He even went so far as to say something to the effect of 130,000 people, because that's how many people could fit in the stadium over there in Mexico City, which they were scheduled to fight. He said that you can't even get 130,000 people that can afford those kind of tickets. He was all kind of disrespectful of Mexico. Julio Cesar Chavez addressed Greg Haugen. He said, I'm not going to have mercy on you. I'm going to rip your head clean off. Sure enough, what happened in that fight in 1993? Julio Cesar Chavez comes out the gate charging like an angry bull and proceeds to beat the snot out of Greg Haugen from pillar to post for all of 5 rounds before the referee finally decides to grant him mercy and call the fight. TKO stoppage in favor of Julio Cesar Chavez. What made it so profound was that Julio Cesar Chavez was not traditionally a coming out the gate fast type of fighter. He was a volume puncher, not even a volume puncher so much, actually kind of a volume puncher, but he would gradually break you down with his body shots and break you down to where you couldn't really breathe too well towards the second half of the fight. And that's when Julio Cesar Chavez would take your head off your shoulders. He didn't do that in that fight with Greg Haugen because Greg Haugen disrespected. So let's fast forward to last weekend at the AT&T Stadium, the home of Jerry Jones built. We got Billy Joe Saunders, the Romanian Gypsy, undefeated. He's a phenom. I've been following Billy Joe Saunders for years. If you don't know, he was a badass going into the Canelo fight. Casual boxing fans in America might not have known, but folks across the pond over there in Britain know that Billy Joe Saunders was the man. He was in the Olympics in 2008. He had beaten some pretty reputable names over there across the pond. He defended his title. He was a good dude. Great footwork. He was a southpaw, so based on Canelo's previous close fights, like even his loss to Mayweather, we saw that he wasn't very good against movement. And when he had that close fight against Erislandy Lara, that some people would say Erislandy Lara should have won, I don't think so. Personally, I think Canelo won. It was a close fight. I'm not mad at the decision. But people were under the assumption that a slick-moving southpaw was going to be the answer to Canelo Alvarez. Well, he's walking around, Billy Joe Saunders, before the fight in the hotel in that trademark Versace robe that all the fighters and MMA guys seem to think is the move now before fights. And one of the people comes up to them, somebody from the press says, do you have anything you'd like to say to Jalisco, which is the state in Mexico where Canelo Alvarez is from? He says something to the effect of, suck my balls, or something to that effect. Something you don't say. Listen, folks, should you ever find yourself in an amateur or professional fight with a Mexican, they have a lot of pride. They got machismo. They got orgullo. You do not disrespect them. He learned the hard way. Going into the fight, Saul Canelo Alvarez said, basically, he predicted, I'm going to stop him in the 8th or 9th round. Hey, the loudmouth gypsy who was known for popping off and saying wild stuff out the neck, that's what Billy Joe Saunders does. It's good. It attracts attention for the fight. Fight day, last Saturday, AT&T Stadium, in front of 73,000 people. Canelo Alvarez only threw like 26 punches around. Mind you, Billy Joe Saunders is dotting him up with the pillow hands and pretty much outboxing him. But there's the debate of what matters more. Landing a bunch of pillow punches that are getting grazed off the glove, or those heavy thundering body shots that Canelo Alvarez was dropping. Either way, I had it about 6-2 in favor of Canelo because I was counting more the snap you can hear from those punches as they would land on Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders was doing the same thing. He's coming out, he's slipping left, and he's going under to avoid Canelo's hook. Well, he slipped left, went under, and at about the 8th round, Canelo timed it perfectly, hit him with an uppercut, cracked his eye socket in 4 places. Billy Joe Saunders finished the round, but goes into his corner, and that's when his corner decides we're not going to put him back out there. He's got a shattered eye socket. He could probably go blind, which is kind of karma because Billy Joe Saunders was kind of making comments about Danny Dubois, after he got his eye socket busted in that fight with Joe Joyce from a jab. If you didn't see that fight, go check that out. So, yes, Billy Joe Saunders got his eye busted in front of 73,000 people at AT&T Stadium because of Saul Canelo Alvarez. Boy, boxing is doing so good right now. Anyways, hopefully Saul Canelo Alvarez gets that fight sooner rather than later with Caleb Plant and we get to see an undisputed super middleweight champion for the first time in boxing. Boxing is thriving right now. And then I'm guessing Canelo will probably clean up the rest of the super middleweight division. He'll pluck off Charlo and Benavidez and whoever else wants to smoke. Maybe move up to super middleweight. I don't know. Boxing is live right now. Let's talk about what's going on next weekend. I'm going to cover a lot of ground right now. I'm really excited. It's my first episode, y'all. This is Hot Boxing Minute. We got an undisputed. Speaking of undisputed, Jose Ramirez. If you don't know, Jose Ramirez from Avenal, California, his parents are fruit farmers. He's got 2 of the belts in the junior welterweight division. Across the pond, you got another bruiser, Josh Taylor, with 2 of those belts. This is going to be a good fight, folks. It looks like Jose Ramirez might become the first person of Mexican descent to become an undisputed champion. This is big time stuff, folks. To become an undisputed champion, you have to have all 4 belts from all 4 sanctioning bodies. The 4 sanctioning bodies are the WBA, the WBO, the WBC, and the IBF. Why are there so many bodies? Because boxing is huge, folks. It is a gigantic global sport that has been around since the dawn of civilization, and there's just a lot of participants. There's a lot of governing organizations involved. Will it ever be under one banner like UFC? I don't know. Back to the undisputed issue. It's a big thing because, there's politics involved. There's rivalries. There's sometimes fighters just ducking other fighters. So we rarely get to see undisputed fighters. I think the last undisputed fighter that I can recall in memory was at cruiserweight with Alexander Usyk when he was running it with the cruiserweights before he moved up to heavyweight, which I think happened in 2019. As far as junior welterweights, the last undisputed junior welterweight champion was Costa Tszyu back in 2001. So we got all kind of historical happenings going on in boxing, folks. Pay attention to your boy, Hot Boxing Minute. I will educate you all on the sweet science and what's going on with the politics of boxing. Jose Ramirez is going to be fighting Josh Taylor next weekend. I'm going to go more into that in my next episode. What do y'all folks think about Jose Ramirez fighting Josh Taylor? Who do you think is going to be the winner in that one? What do you think of Brandon Figueroa's performance tonight? Let me know in the comment section, folks. Press follow if you haven't already done so. You're witnessing the takeover, folks. We're only going uphill from here. This is Hot Boxing Minute.